Hello and welcome to this presentation entitled How to Become an Excellent Reviewer as part of the EECERA Online Festival. I'm Diana Marshall, I'm Head of Reviewer Programmes at Taylor & Francis and I am your chair for this session today. Some of you will be watching this live while others will be watching later as a recording. However you are watching, I hope you really enjoy the session. If you are watching live, whilst your cameras and microphones cannot be switched on, you may want to engage with us in two different ways. Firstly, you can use the chat function to say hello, to share your thoughts or reactions to anything we say as we go through the panel or develop a dialogue. Second, you may submit a question for the panel via the Q&A section. You'll be able to find that at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And at the end of the talk section of this, I will put some of your questions to the panel for discussion. If you're watching later as a recording, then you may also leave comments in the comments section beneath the video. I would like to remind you that all posts made are public and that all comments should be made professionally and courteously. Any comments made in the chat function will show the username that you've logged in with today and will appear in the recording of the session. So if you wish to make a comment, please make sure you post it to all panelists and attendees so that everyone watching can see what you have written. So with that being said, I'm going to start my slides while I introduce who you've got on the panel for today. Okay, so I'm hoping that that is coming through clearly for you now on your screens. So today I am joined by two fantastic panelists, Pascal, President of EECERA, and Tony Bertram, who is the coordinating editor of the European Early Childhood Education Research Journal. The outline of our session today is that I will present for around 20 minutes to introduce some key tips on being a peer reviewer. And then Chris and Tony will add in their comments, especially around what you should consider if you're being a reviewer for EECERJ in particular. And then finally, we'll move on to that Q&A section. So to get us into this topic, let's start off by briefly thinking about why peer review is important and what role the reviewer plays within the process. Hopefully, because you are in this session, you are already convinced that peer review is an important process. Detailed assessment of articles is essential to ensure that what is published is of sufficient quality and can be trusted. And although it can sometimes feel like a very challenging process from an author's perspective, at its best, peer review is more like a conversation between the reviewers, the editor, and the authors, where the research can be discussed, improved upon, and effectively communicated to the wider research community. And when you take on the role of being a peer reviewer for an article, there are responsibilities and expectations which are associated with that. And different people in the process may well have different expectations of the reviewer. The editor will hope that the reviewer will provide a report which will give them the information they need to make a decision on the article, whilst the authors will be looking for constructive and helpful feedback. The readers of the journal will be looking to the reviewers to provide that thorough assessment of the article, which means that they can trust what is published and also that what is finally published includes all the required information for the work to be clear and understandable. And when you're approaching peer review, it can be helpful to bear in mind these expectations from the different people involved and of the role of the reviewer. The role of the reviewer is to give their expertise, to give that constructive feedback and assessment of a piece of research. So holding that in mind can be really helpful when you pick up an article to review. So what are my tips for doing this really well? Well, first, I would highlight the importance of deciding carefully whether to say yes to a review invitation or whether you need to actually refuse and say no. When you receive that email asking you to review, consider whether you have the time and whether you have the right expertise to fulfill the role. And always decline or discuss with the journal if you think there might be any kind of conflict of interest, which might affect your assessment of the article. The editor will, of course, be hoping that you will say yes, but a quick no is more helpful to them than not returning a report after you've agreed to review, or returning a report that maybe isn't so helpful. And if you do say yes, then it's a good idea to get an overview of the article before you get into the detail of a section-by-section assessment. What type of article have you been sent to review? Is it a research article or is it something else? What are the main approaches and conclusions that the authors have taken? What are the methodologies that they are using? And once you've got that overall sense of the flow of the article, then you're in a better position to go back section by section and look in more detail at what's been said and what the authors have done. And once you do start getting into those details, think about what's required from each section of the article and how the overall argument fits together. What might be the requirement from different sections will depend on the type of article that you've been asked to assess. If you're assessing a research article, for example, that has any qualitative or quantitative data, then you might expect to see a structure of introduction, methods, results, and then discussion and conclusions. But different articles or different approaches to research, like a theoretical approach, might have different structures and approaches involved. In general, consider whether the rationale for the work is clear and whether the conclusions are consistent with the data or the argument presented. Taylor and Francis actually has a checklist available online, which is particularly useful for the assessment of research articles and outlines the questions that you might want to ask yourself as a reviewer. And I will make sure that I put the link to that in the chat before the end of the session. One area where it's particularly important for you to focus your attention as a reviewer is the methodology, which should be clearly explained and suitable for the questions that the authors are aiming to answer. And it's important to consider the methods impartially without immediately considering what the results of the article are, because the methods should be based on the question, and then the results are whatever they are out of that. Some research indicates that the results presented can actually change the view of the reviewers on the methodology of the article, with reviewers in this particular study being more critical of methods if they produce negative results, even if it was the same method as produced a positive result, and being more positive about methods where the results matched the theoretical preference of the reviewers. So it is always hard to know what our unconscious biases are, but when you're reviewing methods, do try and consider them impartially on the basis of whether they're suitable for the question asked, rather than on the basis of the results presented. This is an example of some real comments provided by a peer reviewer for an article in F1000 Research. I can share this with you because the peer review process for F1000 is completely open and available online, and the review reports are citable. So this isn't as a usual report might be, which would be very confidential to the editor and the journal and the author. The reviewer here has, I think, done a really good job of giving some comments on the methodology. They've asked relevant questions about the study design and also provided a reference that backs up some of their comments. And these clarifications that they've asked for would significantly improve the reporting and understanding of the study. So this is, I think, an example of a really good comment. So I've mentioned there the importance of thinking about the methods. Another important thing to consider as a reviewer is that you might notice potential concerns relating to either research or publication ethics while you are assessing an article. There are some examples here on the slide of the kind of points you might be concerned about. The important thing to remember here is that as a reviewer, you shouldn't investigate any of these aspects yourself. Sometimes reviewers ask me if they should be running papers they receive through plagiarism detection software or something like that. And the answer is no, you don't have to do that. And the journal won't expect you to do that. As a reviewer, if you have concerns at all that there might be an issue with an article relating to ethics, then the most important thing for you to do is to let the journal know your concern so that they can investigate and take any action required. If you have an urgent issue, then you could raise it with an email to the journal directly. Or if it's less urgent, then you might just raise it in your confidential comments to the editor when you return your report. So that's just something to be aware of, but something that as a reviewer, you shouldn't feel that you have to investigate in any kind of detail. Just let the journal know if you've got a problem. So we're moving through this very quickly because we really do want to get onto the Q&A. And now I'm going from, in the second set of these tips, moving through from how you might be thinking about the questions you ask yourself as a reviewer and the kind of things you might pick up, through to how you might want to structure your report. So lots of journals will give you a free text box where you need to add comments to the author, and they'll probably also ask you to give some kind of overall recommendation. It's always a good idea to start your report with a brief summary, as it shows that you've read and understood the research involved. One approach to structuring the rest of your comments is, as laid out here, to put them under major and minor comments. Major comments would be those which are really essential for the authors to address, which could affect the validity or the soundness of the study. Minor comments would be things which were a bit more maybe nice to have. They could improve the work, but it wouldn't be a big problem if they weren't changed. So that's one way of structuring comments in a review report. An alternative way of structuring your comments could be seen in this slide. This is an example of a kind of mock-up of a review report. Again, it begins and ends with a summary, also a nice polite thank you for the opportunity to review, which is always a nice way to open a review. But in this example, as you can see, the comments have been grouped under the headings of the article. And this can be a really helpful alternative approach because it helps the author to know exactly what part of the article each comment relates to. If you do structure your comments in this way, then it's still important to make it clear to the author and the editor which are those essential major comments that need to be addressed and which are the more minor suggestions or nice to haves. So do still try and make that distinction, but this is an alternative way that you might want to think about when you are looking at that free text box and thinking about how to structure your report. Another thing you might have noticed in that example report that I just put up is that the comments were very specific, not only under the relevant headings, but bullet pointed and referring to specific page and line numbers within the article. And that really helps, as being that specific makes it really clear to the authors exactly what part of the article your comments relate to and what you want them to address. So that can really be helpful in targeting and making your report as clear as possible to the authors. And as you bring those comments together, whatever structure you use, consider what it would be like to receive those comments as an author. Would it be helpful, constructive, fair, and polite? If you wouldn't want to receive a particular comment on your own work, then consider how you might rephrase it. You can be critical in a constructive way. And also reflect on any potential biases you might have in relation to the work. Hopefully you will have declared any conflicts of interest or decided not to agree to review if you thought you couldn't fairly assess a particular article. But as you go through the process, do consider where there is anything affecting your comments and make sure you are being as neutral and impartial as possible. I often share this report. It's another one from F1000 Research, and I really like it because I think it's an example of a good approach to a report. This reviewer is recommending that the article is okay as it is, and you don't have to read all of this, but essentially they haven't suggested any changes at all. Sometimes in similar circumstances, reviewers might only write a single line saying that the paper's okay. And that can really leave the editor a bit unsure as to whether the reviewer has really looked closely at the work or not. In this example, although the reviewer is just recommending approval with no changes, they have taken the time to give some positive comments to support their recommendation and illustrate really clearly that they have read and understood the work. So this is, I think, a great example of just a straightforward approval report that's taken some time to show that they've really engaged with the research. And I've already mentioned that if you come across any concerns about a potential ethical problem, then you would want to contact the journal or the editor. That holds true for any kind of question or issue that might come up at any point during the review process. It's possible that you will encounter issues or questions you're not sure about, and do reach out to the journal or the editor if you need any help. They would much rather help you to solve problems, and they will also want to know if your circumstances have changed. For example, if you now can't complete the review process on time because life happens, then let them know that so that they can change their approach as needed. And finally, the last of my top 10 tips on being a really excellent reviewer, we come back to the point of re-review. There might be times when authors have responded to your comments, made some revisions, and the editor might want you to look at the article again to confirm if your comments have actually been addressed. At this stage of the process, the focus really needs to be on assessing the author's response to the original concerns. So it is best if you, as the original reviewer, are able to look at the article at this point and make this assessment of whether your comments have been addressed. The editor really doesn't want to have to find a new reviewer to help them at this stage, so it's great if you, as the reviewer who's looked at the first version, considers re-review as part of your commitment to reviewing the article. When you are re-reviewing, check whether the authors have responded to your concerns and whether they've made suitable changes to the article so that the published version will have the right information and readers won't be asking exactly the same questions that you were when you first looked at the article. Don't take it personally if in the author's response they've not done exactly what you suggested, but evaluate their explanation for any changes and consider whether what they've done is okay for publication. So that was my very quick run through my top 10 tips for being an excellent reviewer. And at this point, I am going to just direct you to a couple of the different guidelines and help that we have available on our website about being a peer reviewer. We have sort of more extended versions of reviewer training available if that's something you think would be of help to you. And at this point, I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I am going to invite Chris and Tony to jump in at this point and to give their extra comments on what they would see as a really good review.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Diane, for a very comprehensive overview of the reviewing process. I have to say that I absolutely agree with some of the things that you said, and particularly about being positive in your review and helpfully steering people to not just criticizing them, but critiquing it. Yeah, fair enough. But as I said in some of my comments, you don't have to stand on somebody's work to make yourself feel taller. That's not what the process is about. It's a collegial thing about, you know, how can we help each other to improve the knowledge that we're trying to disseminate. I guess as the coordinating editor of the journal, I'd have to say the thing that I find, and I don't know whether you want to comment on this, Chris, the thing that I find is least well addressed, and I think there are particular issues around early childhood, the involvement of children's voice and so on. The thing that tends to be least well addressed are the issue of ethics. And ethics is often dismissed as sort of that one sentence, you know, I've complied to my university regulations around ethics. Whereas I think we do need to explore the process of the research. I don't know if you want to comment on that further, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, it is one of the areas, particularly for an organisation. EECERA has a very strong ethical stance. It works with a set of ethical principles, which is really about children's rights and empowerment and being respectful and being transparent with those values. And quite often, not only does the paper not discuss ethics, and we've got a big campaign for authors, but often that if they don't talk about ethics or do it in a minimal way, as Tony said, the reviewer doesn't comment on that either. It kind of accepts that ethics isn't a part of. So in every review, we would want to see some reflection on how well ethical issues have been handled in this piece of work, particularly with regards to the rights of young children. And you know, the guideline, EECERA publishes these guidelines for ethical guidelines, particularly for publications. So authors should be looking at those, and even papers that are theoretical or conceptual, and we do publish those. Often the reviewer will say, well, there were no ethical issues because people weren't involved, but actually in your choice of literature, that's an ethical choice where you know what you foregrounded, what you didn't foreground as an author are ethical choices. So there is always ethics in a paper, I suppose, of what I'm saying, and so reviews should always comment on them. And it is the one area for both authors and reviewers that's often a gap. And we, as an editorial board, are trying hard to up the profile of that. So it's a bit different than publishing ethics. It's the research ethics of how the piece of work was carried out, how data was elicited, how data was analysed, how data is presented, those kinds of ethics as well. That's really important.
Yeah, and if you aren't aware of it, EECERA have done a code of ethics for early childhood research.
It's just being reviewed, actually, isn't it, Tony? So, but there's an existing one.
It's online
for a revised version, because with the virtual world and technology, the ethics have shifted again in terms of how data is elicited from people. It brings a whole set of different challenges.
Yeah, but I mean, I'd have to say, first of all, that how important having volunteer reviewers is to the whole process, and how enormously grateful we are to those who want to volunteer. And if you are thinking of volunteering yourself or encouraging others to volunteer, maybe I could just say that we're open to that. And if you contact Serena, who unfortunately is on annual leave at the moment, but who is very responsive. Again, you'll find her on the website, Serena Razak. If you contact Serena, she will ask you for a CV. We ask that everybody who is a reviewer is not only has a PhD, but has also published. And you'll be asked for the key words. And these are quite important because those key words identify you in terms of when Serena is searching for somebody to match to particular papers. So if your interests have changed, you will need to change those keywords, contact Serena and change those keywords. But as I say, we're enormously grateful for this academic group, this community of practice that is helping to develop others. And apart from, what I find is I learn so much from doing reviews. It keeps me up to speed with things and how fashion, I think, in research is changing. I mean, sustainability is a huge, we're getting a huge number of papers around that at the moment.
I think, right, Tony, I think it is a form of CPD for the authors by getting your feedback on their writing, but also yourself as a reviewer, because I find, like you, I learn so much. It keeps me up to speed, and often in the journals you're getting the latest stuff that's going on in terms of method or knowledge. So it really does add value to your own professional knowledge and understanding too.
And I don't want to get into the so-called paradigm wars. I don't think that is the issue. It's sort of what kind of methodology do you need and methods you need to answer the particular questions in hand. So even though it might not be within your paradigm, be open to it. And I think particularly at the moment, we're trying to explore new methodologies in early childhood. And I think the criteria we have is about that the methodology is systematic and rigorous. But the fact that it's innovative doesn't mean to say that it can't be acceptable, because actually that's how we move forward. So we are open to different methodologies, as long as I say it's it is obviously rigorous and systematic. What else might you get? And you can get a handsome certificate from EECERA not to put up on your study wall, to acknowledge that you are a researcher for the journal. And of course, there are now systems whereby your reviews, we have to keep an anonymity, of course, but there are websites like Publons, if you don't know Publons, where you can actually ensure that your work is recorded and can be taken into account in terms of your CV and so on. Have we got any questions in the...
Can I just add something more general before we get on to the specifics of the questions and how it's done? And picking up on the point you made, Tony, about, I want to say something a bit about what the journal's about and the role of our reviewer community. And the reviewer community is a vital part of it. I think, Diana, you said this in your presentation, the authors are important, but the reviewers are the other part of that. And to meet international standards for a journal, we at EECERA do adopt international standards in terms of blind reviews. So the author is anonymous to the reviewer and the reviewers are anonymous to the author. It's a double blind review process. So every paper minimally is sent to 2 external reviewers, one of whom will be and I think this answers something that's in the chat. One is a specialist in the topic or the methodology that's being used, and the other is just somebody who's doing research that's more generalist, I suppose. And you might find yourself allocated as the specialist or the generalist. And I think it's fun to do both of those roles, because also the writing should be clear to a non-specialist as well as a specialist. But we would always have one specialist and one generalist as far as we can. If there is a mixed opinion, it would go to a 3rd reviewer. And those reviewers are also from 2 different countries. So we try and get that diversity of perspective, which sometimes does lead to difference of opinion. And then the editor, Tony, or myself have to make a judgment. It goes to 3rd review, and then you've got 3 reviews, then we have to make a judgment. But it's a very rigorous process of review. And part of that is the whole point of the journal is developmental for the authors and the sector. So we're trying to generate new knowledge and innovative knowledge in terms of method and knowledge for the sector. But we're also trying to we also at EECERA are trying to upskill the sector. So coming back to your comments, the detail comments and the constructive nature of the and positive, constructive, but critical comments, they should be developmental and they should help the authors or author really improve and extend and deepen their paper, so that they should, we hope, welcome the feedback that they're getting from you. We also, I believe, if you've reviewed, you would get the blind review of the other reviewer, so you can see how your review matches with the other reviewer, because sometimes that's nice to see. Am I saying the same kind of things? What are the comments that the other person's getting? So we try to get that reviewer connectivity done as well. Coming back to gaps and in our, Tony's and my experience as reviewers of reviews, as well as reviewers ourselves, Tony's pointed to the gap in attention to ethics. The other thing, and it sits two other areas, I would say, is that often the theoretical or the conceptual underpinning of the paper, the concepts used, the theoretical framework is not well articulated, and that needs to be carefully commented on. They'll tell you what the methodology is in great detail, and they'll tell you what their findings were, but they don't kind of situate it in a theoretical and a conceptual way, or they'll use concepts and terms that it's not clear what they mean, or they've used it in a certain kind of way that doesn't kind of sit within that field very well. So picking up on those things are important. And then the final thing is EECERA is dedicated to praxis and research that changes practice or policy. So the applications, the implications, the final section of a paper where the author really brings out the so whatness of the paper. They found this out. We want the author to kind of help the audience see how they might use that knowledge. How does it inform or shift practice? How does it inform or shift policy? And encouraging them to kind of add a little bit more flesh on that is something that is often, for me, missing in the reviews, because the journal is dedicated to bring research, policy and practice together, so that research bit informing the policy and practice should be very explicit in the paper.
Yeah, just to give you some figures, perhaps only 2% of all the papers that are submitted, only 2% go through completely with an AA rating, if you like, from both reviewers. But the overall rejection rate is somewhere about between 60 and 70. So about a third of papers get through in the end. What I'm saying is that it's often that there are revisions asked and that the process then is renewed. So the rejection rate is about somewhere between 60 and 70%, which is what you'd expect from a journal of EECERA J's standing.
Yeah. But it doesn't mean the paper never gets published. They just have to revise and resubmit.
Yeah,
so it's not the end of the line.
It's a developmental process, in fact.
Yeah. Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you both. Sorry, Chris, I was about to start posing you some of the questions.
Yes, let's do that. Let's do that.
Yeah, brilliant. So you'd already brilliantly addressed the question that had come through in the chat about what to do if you're the reviewer who's familiar with the topic, but maybe not a statistical analysis. You've brought out the fact that for this journal, you very deliberately have somebody who's a bit more of a generalist and a bit more of a specialist. A follow-up question that I have for you as editors is, does it help you if in the confidential comments to the editor, if reviewers tell you what they couldn't assess? Is that a helpful thing for them to do for you?
Is the question though that you're looking for what's missing?
I mean more if the person who was looking at the article sort of realized, here's this statistical test, this is really complicated, it's beyond me. Is it helpful for you if they put in their confidential comments to editors, actually that test, I'm not sure what happened.
So here's a new instrument kind of thing, and I've never come across this before. I mean, as Chris was saying, part of this is that you do learn about different techniques and technologies, and particularly with the introduction of computers and all the rest of it, all of that's got really quick, much quicker now, so and the stuff comes up. I think it's always possible to come back and say, look, when I've looked at this paper now, I'm not quite sure that I've got the competence to do it, you know, and to return it. But I also think that a paper isn't just about whatever the particular part of it is that you can't, and you can always make a comment and assume that perhaps the second marker will know more about that. Because as I said, you have a specialist and you have a generalist usually, and between the two of them, it would be useful to know. But if it isn't there, then I think reviews can be quite open and say, I wasn't able to make comment on that because I don't know about it. But I think if I was in that position, I would go and find out what it was, you know, so that I could learn myself.
I also think that, I mean, the bottom line is, yes, I think it is very helpful in the confidential, because we can, as Tony said, check out to see if the second reviewer picked it up and covers that. And if neither did, we'd have to send it to a third reviewer that did. So it is very helpful, I think, that kind of feedback. I mean, knowing the realms of your expertise and confidence is quite important, I think, and being clear when you're not sure is helpful to a reviewer, because otherwise an author can legitimately come back and say, well, the reviewer didn't seem to understand what I was here, and then our job as editors is to find somebody that does. But it would be better to do that before the author got there. It's better for us to know that rather than the author to feel that at that point.
I mean, the process, I mean, we've got 200 articles here, and the process is automated as much as we can in order to make sure that, you know, the speed of return is good. When you first are notified, here's an article that we think fits in with your keywords and that you've got that expertise, you're invited to look at it and say, you know, can you do it now? And is this something that you do? And if you go through it and at that point you say, actually, I don't know about this, then you just need to say no, you know, and then it's returned back into the system and we find somewhere else. But what I think one of the points you made, Diane, was that often people accept, you know, in the hope that they will, and then stuff happens, and don't then just sit on it for weeks, but send it back to us and say, look, you know, I'm awfully sorry I did accept, but here it is, you know, I can't do it. Because as you know, the way that the journal is judged in part is how quickly we can go through the whole review process. That's part of the impact factor, which is crucial to the journal's standing.
And I think there's that really important point there as well of thinking about what it would be like for you as the author in that situation, because you might, if you were the author, you wouldn't want to be sitting and waiting and thinking, oh, what's going on with this review process? What's happening? Yeah. So, and that open communication with the editors can really just help prevent those kinds of situations. Yeah. There's a few other questions coming in which are sort of related to this. So one question is actually related to that, saying no. If I can't review a paper, will I actually be asked again? And also a related question of how often people will be asked to review something.
Well, I mean, the connection is through the keywords. The keywords you got there are the one is how you select it. But I happen to know that Serena, who's the administrator, soon learns how quickly people turn the paper around, and as I said before, some things become more fashionable, and so you get a lot of things around a particular topic, and as I said, sustainability, and it's very easy to burn up all your reviewers, you know, by using the ones who are interested in sustainability, and so we have to be careful of that we distribute and spread to make sure that people aren't asked too often. But if you refuse one review, does it mean you'll not get another review? Of course it doesn't. You know, people will come back. But if you refuse it 10 times, then it's more likely that Serena won't come to you and say, you know, because she'll have learned that maybe.
Well, we do actually do a systematic review of reviewers and how many. We try not to overload popular topics or popular people or speedy people. But, you know, if you say you can do it and you do it, you know, Serena will keep pushing stuff through to you. So you can help manage that load yourself. But we do keep an eye on it.
You put your hand up and
somebody has said no, like for a year, Serena would write and say, do you still want to be on the review panel? Because there's an indication then that they're not that wedded to or keen to be part of that process. Or they might say, I've had a difficult time, but now I'm
people's circumstances.
Get back in with you. Yeah.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And another question about sort of those situations where you've maybe got a bit of a difference of opinion between reviewers. We've got a question here. How many articles do you have needing to go to a third review?
I do have those statistics, but not in my head. I mean, it depends. It can be as much as 10%.
The majority don't. The majority are sorted out with 2 reviews. But, you know, it's less than 10% in my experience. I think it's not a large number, but it's a significant small number, if you see what I mean. But, you know, if there are 2 conflicting reviews, it automatically goes to a third reviewer. And because we've got different countries and different perspectives and a generalist, and we do get conflicting reviews. So it's not an uncommon thing, but the most papers don't go to a third reviewer.
Great, thank you. There's a question which is relating to something that I touched on as part of my comments. So I'd like to sort of take the first go at it, and then I'll hand it on for any further comments. But there's a question here about, is it the reviewer's responsibility to check for plagiarism and accuracy? Will we be liable if anything was uncovered after publication, if either of these things was discovered? I sort of touched on a little bit of this around the ethics pieces in my presentation. No, as a reviewer, you do not have to check for plagiarism here. If you notice something which is making you think, oh, I'm not sure if I've seen something similar before, then the journal is probably already running plagiarism detection, those kinds of things. The journal will be doing that. And I would say as well, in general terms, I've never been aware of a publication ethics case where something's come up after publication and the reviewers have been held liable. That's just not how it works. So again, don't feel any kind of undue pressure of, oh my goodness, if I don't spot this, then I'm going to be blamed somehow. That's not how this works. If something comes up after publication, in many instances, you know, it could be that maybe the journal could have caught something. In many instances, you don't know what you don't know at the time. And in every case, the journal would take steps to correct the record and make sure that what was published in the literature is as accurate and up to date as possible. But no reviewers, no one will come back to you as a reviewer and say that you should have or should have done something differently. So please be reassured there. I don't know if Tony and Chris want to add anything.
No, absolutely, Diana. It's our responsibility, not the reviewer's responsibility for this. And as I say, we've got the fail safe is that if 2 people have agreed or 2 people have disagreed and gone to a third one, that really is, we're putting things up for review here for peer feedback so that we can develop the field generally. And this isn't something that's intended to be snipey, but actually developmental. And that's the view that we have it. Yes, there is a system by which before publication it's checked, and at that point sometimes things do come up, and sometimes we have to go back to an author and say, look, there's an issue here, and often it's about the length of quotes that have been used or something, but normally that's picked up before then. And one of the things that does happen is self-plagiarism, where people are taking stuff from that they've written before and they're using it again. And I have to say that the two no-nos that get in the way are self-plagiarism, and also people who think that they can send their paper to more than one journal by, I mean, the idea is if I scatter it out across these journals, I get one of them to think. If you do that, you run into serious trouble. That's an absolute no-no.
Or if two relatively similar papers, so they've tweaked it a little bit and think it's a different paper, but it's not. And it's astonishing how many of our reviewers review on more than one journal. So often the reviewers do pick it up because they think, I've seen that paper or something really similar 2 years ago, or I've just reviewed, you know, on the agenda for review for another journal. So, you know, the reviewers are quite a wise, and they're a networked community generally, and they do come back to us and directly say, we've got a problem, you know, we have a problem here. And then it's Tony's, as coordinator, it's Tony's responsibility to deal with that. But it is taken very seriously, those cases.
Another thing you get is what we call onion splitting, where you know, you've got a piece of work that's been done, and you've got various layers that make up this piece of work, and so people take each of the layers out and send them around as different things, and actually it doesn't work because it's not cohesive. You often find that with PhD students who think they can just, you know, I'll do a bit on methodology here and I'll do a bit on the results there and so on. And I would advise you against that, because it becomes apparent very quickly that a piece of work has got elements missing, you know. So onion splitting is another thing that, you know, that we find does happen, not frequently, but it's one of those that we watch out for.
Thank you. Thank you. That's all really, really useful to hear those details. There's another comment that's come in, which is possibly more of a comment than a question, but just saying many journals don't give a due date for review, and I find it helpful to have a deadline. I presume that EECERJ, sorry, does give deadlines, and I think many journals that I know do. But yes, I think that's a very good comment there, isn't it?
I think because Serena is more or less full-time on the journal, and that's one of the things that the association support is her time. Everybody else is a volunteer, I have to say. Because of that, Serena very quickly comes back to you and saying, where are we? You know, she obviously keeps a calendar, it's all automated, and she would come after you and say, which is one of the reasons why we have one of the best throughputs of all the journals.
I believe in the letter, Tony, that she sends out to reviewers, inviting you to review, it says, can you do this within so many weeks? So it does give you a timeline, and please let us know if you can't, basically. So we are a journal that does give a timeline.
And I'd have to say that our review pro forma is much more specific, so that we actually, as we do when we send out the call for papers for the conference, it comes in particular sections, so you're directed to speak about the different elements of the research, the methodology, the ethics, and the implications, and so on. So that's helpful in terms of structuring your response that we're talking about.
Thank you. There was another point that came up in the chat much earlier on, I think, while I was talking about feedback. So I think Chris, you'd posed the question to everyone, what would help you as a reviewer to do this important job? And there were a couple of comments back that said about it would be great to get some feedback, because reviewing can feel, the quote is a bit of a pit of silence. So I don't know if either of you have any comments on how reviewers can get some feedback, or know a bit more about, feel less like they're in that pit of silence.
I mean, it's difficult because it's a blind process, and therefore you shouldn't know the names and who. So you know, that's part of meeting the international standards of review, is that the reviewers shouldn't know each other, and you shouldn't know the author. You know, that whole process is anonymous. But we do in EECERA, in our journal with our reviewers, try and, once the review process is complete, all reviewers should get an email from Serena, which gives your review alongside the other reviews, whether that's 1 or 2 other reviews. So you'll be able to see, and I think I said this earlier, the comments of the other reviewer, and reflect on that. And that was in response to feedback we had from reviewers some time ago, saying it would be good to see what the others are saying about this paper, and it's the learning process. So we do that. And then, you know, having events like this, normally we're doing this online and we can't, but normally we'd be in a room together and face to face. And we do try and have events where we get our reviewers together, where you can kind of share the highs and lows of reviewing, and the challenges and the skill base of it. And we're working hard to do more of that as an association, because we realise how important our reviewers are. But in a way, it is compromise about a particular paper, because the protocol, the ethic is that you are anonymised and anonymous. So as far as we can, we give you the other feedback, but that's as far as that goes.
I mean, obviously, early childhood is a specialism, but within early childhood, there are specialisms and specialisms. And once you get down to that kind of level, then you know who's in that particular field with you. You may well have published with some of the people that you're actually being asked to review. And you can, in some instances, well, I found I can actually think, well, I know who that is, because, you know, the way that they are approaching the subject. But I think learning from each other, as Chris says, where these reviews are put side by side, is a very useful thing, because it tells you how people are seeing something similar or different to what you've written. I have to say the majority of reviewers, this agreement between the reviewers, it's self-evident from the work.
I think Linda's point in the chat that you don't need now some general feedback, are we too tough, that kind of moderating of, I mean, I think, you know, Tony and I and the editorial team do that, but we don't, you know, if there's a reviewer whose comments are continually very thin or very harsh, we would individually go back and have that conversation, I think, with them. Not many, mostly I think reviewers do an excellent job in my experience, but we could look at that a little bit more. You know, it's a good suggestion that we could have kind of moderation or moderation events. It's you know, we are looking to think how to support our reviewers more, so these suggestions are really helpful, and we'll think about them and take them on as we start to develop our policy.
I do want moderation, but I don't always want the reviewers to agree. I want them to be able to have an independent voice and see different things. You know, that's part of the review process.
But I think we could have sessions where we look together collectively at reviewers' comments, anonymous, and like you do with kids' work, moderate it and just kind of think, you know, what you showing them, Diana, some really good examples is helpful, isn't it? Yeah. But we could do that really specifically with an ECRJ perspective on, so that they're about the kinds of papers that we'd be reviewing. You know, we'll look at that. I think it's a really helpful suggestion.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, as we've been doing more of this reviewer training, I mean, what I presented is a kind of a very quick version of a much longer reviewer training, and certainly as part of that, the more we've done that, using specific examples, saying this is a really good report, and actually making up some examples of some ones which we thought maybe weren't so good, can be really helpful in engaging that conversation.
Maybe post some really good examples, anonymized examples on the site actually for reviewers to have a look at. We've got the template, as Tony said, to offer one that was, as long as it was a, you know, it was a good one, and the author and the reviewers agreed to us sharing it. I think having examples are quite helpful.
Yeah, I think consent there's the really good thing, which is why I always do that. Why use F1000 examples so much, because it's already out there, so it's nice and citable. But yeah, I think that sounds like a really.
And
really
I have to say, Diana, that Taylor and Francis have been really great about putting these different video clips and making them available. You know, in the way that you've involved yourself in this conference. And that this video, in fact, and the others will be available for the next 60 days, you know, and there's a piece of development for people. Yeah.
Absolutely. And yes, I've shared in the chat the reviewer checklist, which is available. I'm also going to put in a link to where our kind of other reviewer training resources are. We're about to add more videos to this. Again, some might be a little bit more focused on other subject areas, some might be really suitable for early child development. So yeah, do look at these resources as well, which might be helpful as you develop as a reviewer.
And if there are people out there who you feel would make a good reviewer that you want to include, just write to me and say, and we'll take it forward. As I say, what we're looking for are people who've got a doctorate already, but who have done some publications, research publications or books, and we're open to having a debate about bringing them into our reviewed body. And it's a good learning process. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yes, and I think we do occasionally, we've got some surveys going of peer reviewers generally across a number of journals, and actually interest in the article consistently comes out as the top reason for reviewing. And I think it's also, as we've highlighted, a really good part of being a reviewer is getting to read that cool, new, interesting thing that's going on in your field. Fantastic. I feel like we're coming to a pause and we've got only 2 minutes left of the session, so we should probably finish on time. So thank you to Chris and to Tony for being part of this discussion. As mentioned, the recording of this will be available for the next 60 days. It's been really brilliant to be part of this, and I hope that every other part of this online festival has been useful and interesting for everybody. And thank you to all of you who have been participating and putting things in the chat and asking questions. It's been great to engage with you on this topic today. So thank you, everybody.
And can I say thank you to you, Diana, for your presentation, and thank you to all those reviewers who participate. I mean, it's fantastic work, and it couldn't be done without you. So thanks. Yeah, it's an enjoyable session. Thanks.